The gunshot that killed Rebecca's husband echoed through the canyon just as the sun began its descent behind the crimson peaks of the Virginia Range. And in that single moment, everything she had known about love, safety, and hope shattered into fragments too small to ever piece back together. She stood frozen on the dusty main street of Belmont, Nevada, watching John crumple to the ground, his blood seeping into the parched earth, while the bandit who had pulled the trigger disappeared into the maze of ramshackle buildings that made up their small mining town in the spring of 1878. Rebecca Lawson had arrived in Belmont only 8 months earlier as a new bride, full of dreams about building a life with John in this rough silver mining town nestled in the Tokoma Range. She had been 19 then, freshly married to her childhood sweetheart from Sacramento, ready to embrace whatever challenges the frontier might bring. John had secured work as a clerk at the assayer's office, a respectable position that promised steady income and a future. They had rented a small house on the edge of town, painted it white, and planted wildflowers in the yard despite the harsh desert soil. Rebecca had started taking in mending and sewing to supplement their income, dreaming of the day they might have enough saved to buy their own property, start a family, build something lasting. Now, as she knelt beside her husband's lifeless body in the street, those dreams dissolved like morning dew under the unforgiving Nevada sun. Townspeople gathered around her, their faces a blur of sympathy and helplessness. Someone draped a blanket over John's body. Someone else tried to lift Rebecca to her feet, but her legs had stopped working. Her throat had closed around a scream that would not come. She could only stare at the blanket, at the way it covered the man she loved, at how quickly a life could end and a future could vanish. The sheriff, an aging man named Porter, who spent more time drunk than sober, made promises about forming a posse and tracking down the killer, but Rebecca heard the emptiness in his words. Belmont was a lawless place, despite its brief prosperity from the silver mines. Men died here regularly, from cave-ins, from bar fights, from robberies gone wrong. Justice was a luxury the town could rarely afford, and vengeance even less so. The bandit had probably already fled to Austin or beyond, disappearing into the vast emptiness of central Nevada, where a man could ride for days without seeing another soul. They buried John 2 days later in the cemetery on the hill overlooking town, where wooden crosses marked the graves of miners, prostitutes, dreamers, and fools who had all come west seeking something better, and found only red dust and broken promises. Rebecca stood at the graveside in her black mourning dress, borrowed from the widow Thompson, who had worn it to bury 3 husbands already. The preacher read from the Bible, his words carried away by the hot wind that swept down from the mountains. Rebecca felt nothing. The grief that should have consumed her remained locked somewhere deep inside, frozen solid despite the heat, refusing to melt into tears. After the funeral, she returned to the little white house that had once felt like home and now felt like a tomb. Neighbors brought food she could not eat, offered condolences she could not accept, suggested she might want to return to her family in Sacramento. But Rebecca's parents had both died from influenza 2 years earlier. She had no siblings, no aunts or uncles waiting to take her in. John had been her only family, and now he was gone, leaving her alone in a town that devoured people and spat out their bones. The money ran out within 3 weeks. John's wages had stopped the moment his heart did, and the small savings they had accumulated evaporated quickly under the weight of funeral expenses and the simple cost of staying alive. Rebecca tried to continue her sewing work, but her hands shook too badly to thread a needle, and her eyes could not focus on the fabric. She sat for hours at her kitchen table, staring at nothing, feeling nothing, becoming nothing. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house on Main Street, came by on a Wednesday morning in early June with an offer. Rebecca needed work, and the boarding house needed someone to cook and clean for the residents. The pay was modest, but included a small room in the back of the building where Rebecca could live. It meant giving up the house she had shared with John, but she could no longer afford the rent anyway. The landlord had already been by twice, each time growing less patient about collecting what she owed. Rebecca accepted the offer because she had no choice, because survival demanded it, because the alternative was starvation, or worse. She packed her few belongings into a single trunk, took one last look at the wildflowers struggling to survive in the yard, and walked away from the life she had tried to build. The house stood empty behind her, its white paint already beginning to peel in the relentless sun, another casualty of dreams that had not come true. The boarding house was a two-story structure that leaned slightly to the left, as if exhausted by the effort of remaining upright. Mrs. Henderson was a stout woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. She showed Rebecca to a cramped room, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, then laid out the rules with military precision. Breakfast at 6, dinner at 7, no exceptions. Sheets changed on Mondays, floors scrubbed on Wednesdays, laundry on Fridays. The boarders were mostly miners and drifters, men who paid by the week and sometimes disappeared without notice, leaving behind unpaid bills and unwanted memories. Rebecca threw herself into the work with grim determination, rising before dawn to stoke the fire and prepare biscuits and bacon for hungry men who barely looked at her as they shoveled food into their mouths. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached, washed sheets until her hands cracked and bled, served meals in silence while conversations swirled around her like dust devils, touching nothing. She moved through her days like a ghost, present but not alive, breathing but not living, surviving but not hoping. The other residents treated her with a mixture of pity and indifference. Most knew her story, knew she was the widow whose husband had been shot down in the street for the few dollars in his pocket. Some were respectful, removing their hats when she entered a room, keeping their language clean in her presence. Others were less considerate, their eyes lingering too long, their comments edged with suggestions that made her skin crawl. Mrs. Henderson kept order with an iron fist, but she could not be everywhere at once, and Rebecca learned to move quickly, keep her head down, and never be alone with any man she did not trust. Summer deepened, and the heat became oppressive, turning Belmont into an oven that baked everything under its relentless gaze. The silver mines continued to produce, though whispers had begun that the richest veins were playing out, that the town's brief prosperity might soon be coming to an end. More people left than arrived, and the streets that had once bustled with activity grew quieter, emptier, sadder. Rebecca noticed these changes the way one notices storm clouds on the horizon, with distant awareness but no real concern. The town's fate did not matter to her. Nothing mattered anymore. One afternoon in late July, as Rebecca was scrubbing the front steps of the boarding house, she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She glanced up to see a rider coming down Main Street, sitting tall in the saddle despite what appeared to be an injury. As he drew closer, she could see that he was younger than most of the drifters who passed through Belmont, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that hung to his collar beneath a battered hat. He rode with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot, but something in the set of his shoulders suggested pain or exhaustion, or both. The rider stopped in front of the boarding house and dismounted with visible effort, one hand pressed against his side. Rebecca noticed the dark stain on his shirt, saw the way he moved carefully, protecting an injury. His eyes met hers briefly, and she saw they were a startling shade of green, unusual and striking against his tanned face. Then he looked away, tying his horse to the hitching post and reaching for his saddlebags. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from what sounded like days without water. "This the boarding house?" Rebecca stood, brush still in hand, and nodded. "It is. Mrs. Henderson runs it. You looking for a room? If she has one available." He took a step toward the door and stumbled slightly, catching himself against the post. The movement caused him to wince, and the dark stain on his shirt spread a fraction larger. "You are hurt," Rebecca said, the words coming automatically despite the numbness that usually kept her silent. "It is nothing," he replied, but his pale face and unsteady stance told a different story. "Just need a room and a bed for a few days." Rebecca hesitated. Something about this stranger tugged at the frozen place inside her, created a crack in the ice she had built around herself. She told herself it was simple Christian charity, that any decent person would help someone who was clearly injured. But the truth was more complicated. In his green eyes, she had seen something she recognized, a kind of pain that went deeper than physical wounds, a brokenness that mirrored her own. "Come inside," she said, setting down her brush and opening the door. "I will get Mrs. Henderson." The stranger followed her into the dim interior of the boarding house, where the air was marginally cooler than outside. Rebecca led him to the front parlor and gestured for him to sit while she went to find the proprietress. She located Mrs. Henderson in the kitchen, reviewing accounts in a ledger with a stub of pencil. "There is a man here about a room," Rebecca said. He is injured. Looks like he has been shot or stabbed. Mrs. Henderson looked up, her expression hardening. We do not need trouble here. Is he running from the law? I do not know. He did not say. The older woman sighed and closed her ledger. Show me. They returned to the parlor together, where the stranger had indeed sat down, but looked as if he might slide out of the chair onto the floor at any moment. Mrs. Henderson studied him with the assessing gaze of someone who had learned to read people quickly and accurately. You got money? She asked bluntly. The stranger reached into his vest pocket with his free hand and produced a handful of silver coins, setting them on the small table beside his chair. A week in advance. If I need longer, I can pay. Mrs. Henderson counted the coins with her eyes and seemed satisfied. You running from trouble? No, madam. I am a working cowboy. Got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The man who did this is 3 days south by now, and I have no intention of following. I just need time to heal. What is your name? Owen Garrett. Where are you from? Most recently, a ranch down near Tonopah. Before that, Texas. Before that, a lot of places. Mrs. Henderson considered this, then nodded. All right, Mr. Garrett. You can have the room at the end of the hall upstairs. No drinking, no fighting, no bringing women into the house. You break any of my rules, you are out. Clear? Yes, madam, perfectly clear. Rebecca, show him to his room, then bring hot water and clean rags. That wound needs tending before infection sets in. Mrs. Henderson gathered the coins from the table and left the parlor without further comment. Rebecca helped Owen to his feet, noticing how he leaned heavily on the furniture for support. Together they made their slow way up the stairs, Rebecca acutely aware of how close he was, how she could feel the heat radiating from his injured body, how strange it felt to be near a man again, after months of keeping everyone at arm's length. She told herself she was simply following Mrs. Henderson's instructions, nothing more. The room at the end of the hall was small but clean, with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the back alley. Owen made it to the bed and sat down heavily, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. Rebecca helped him remove his hat and boots, then went to fetch the water and rags Mrs. Henderson had requested. When she returned, Owen had managed to unbutton his shirt, but could not seem to get it off without aggravating his injury. Rebecca set down the basin of hot water and the clean rags, then hesitated. I can help, she said quietly. I have tended wounds before. Owen looked at her, and again she saw that flash of recognition in his eyes, as if he could see past her careful mask to the broken pieces underneath. I would be grateful, he said. Rebecca helped him ease the shirt off, revealing a lean, muscled torso marked by scars that spoke of a hard life. The fresh wound was on his left side, just above his hip, a knife cut that had bled freely but appeared to have missed anything vital. She cleaned it carefully with hot water, trying to be gentle despite knowing that it must hurt. Owen endured her ministrations in silence, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the bed. This needs stitching, Rebecca said when she had cleaned away the blood. I can do it if you trust me. I used to help the doctor in Sacramento sometimes, before I came here. I trust you, Owen said, and Rebecca felt something shift in her chest, a small movement in the ice. She found her sewing kit in her room and selected the finest needle and strongest thread. Back in Owen's room, she threaded the needle with hands that were steadier than they had been in months, perhaps because someone else's pain demanded her attention, leaving no room for her own. She worked quickly and efficiently, her stitches small and neat, closing the wound while Owen sat motionless, barely breathing. When she finished, she cleaned the area once more and tore a sheet into strips to bind the wound. You should rest, she said, tying off the bandage. Try not to move too much for a few days. Thank you, Owen said. I did not expect such kindness in a place like this. Rebecca gathered her supplies without responding. Kindness was not what she had offered. She had simply done what needed doing, the same way she cooked meals and scrubbed floors and survived each day. It meant nothing. But as she left Owen's room and closed the door behind her, she found herself thinking about his green eyes, about the scars on his body, about the way he had said, I trust you, as if trust was something simple and uncomplicated. And for the first time since John's death, she felt something other than numbness. It was small, barely there, hardly worth noticing. But it was something. Over the next several days, Rebecca tended Owen's wound morning and evening, changing bandages and checking for signs of infection. He healed quickly, his young body resilient despite the harsh life it had clearly endured. They spoke little during these interactions. Rebecca asked only the questions necessary to assess his condition, and Owen volunteered nothing beyond brief answers. Yet a strange companionship developed between them, built on silence and understanding rather than words. Owen spent most of his time resting in his room, though sometimes Rebecca would find him sitting on the back porch in the evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains. She began bringing him his meals separately from the other boarders, telling herself it was because he needed quiet to recover, not because she wanted an excuse to see him. He always thanked her, always asked how she was doing, always looked at her as if she were a real person, rather than just the widow who cooked and cleaned. One evening, about a week after Owen's arrival, Rebecca brought his dinner to find him sitting on the porch as usual, his shirt off, to let the evening air cool his healing wound. She set the tray down on the small table beside his chair, trying not to stare at the muscles of his chest and arms, at the way the fading light cast shadows across his skin. "Feels good to be outside," Owen said. "I was starting to forget what fresh air smelled like." Rebecca nodded, preparing to retreat back inside, but Owen gestured to the other chair. "Stay for a moment, unless you have other duties." She hesitated, then sat down. The sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the heat of the day was finally beginning to ease. Somewhere in town, a piano played badly, probably at one of the saloons. A dog barked. Life continued, indifferent to suffering. "Mrs. Henderson told me about your husband," Owen said after a long silence. "I am sorry for your loss." Rebecca's hands tightened in her lap. "It was months ago." "That does not make it easier." She glanced at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "You sound like you know." Owen looked out at the darkening mountains. "I lost someone too. Not a wife. My brother. He was killed 3 years ago in a range war down in Lincoln County. We were both working as ranch hands, got caught between two powerful men who cared more about land and cattle than they did about the people dying to protect their interests. Charlie took a bullet meant for me. I held him while he died, and there was nothing I could do to stop it." Rebecca felt the ice inside her crack a little more. "I am sorry." "Me too." Owen picked up his fork but did not eat, just held it, looking at the food without seeing it. "The thing is, afterwards, everyone kept telling me it would get better. That time heals all wounds, that I would move on, that I would forget. But they were wrong. You do not forget. You do not move on. You just learn to carry it differently." "I do not want to carry it," Rebecca said, the words coming before she could stop them. "I want it to be over. I want to stop feeling like this." "Like what?" "Like I died too, but my body forgot to stop breathing." She looked down at her hands, at the cracks and calluses from months of hard work. "I do not cry. I should cry, should not I? When John died, I should have cried, should have screamed, should have fallen apart. But I just felt nothing. I still feel nothing. It is like someone reached inside me and scooped out everything that made me human. And now I am just empty." Owen set down his fork and turned to face her fully. "You are not empty. You are surviving. That is what we do when something breaks us so completely that we cannot see how to put ourselves back together. We go numb because feeling everything at once would destroy us. We become empty because emptiness is easier than pain." "Does it get better?" Rebecca asked, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "Does the emptiness ever go away?" "I do not know," Owen said honestly. "But I know you are not alone in it. I know that sometimes two broken people can help each other bear what one person cannot carry alone." They sat together in the gathering darkness, two strangers bound by grief, and Rebecca felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It was not happiness, it was not hope, but it was not nothing, and that was enough for now. The days fell into a new pattern. Rebecca continued her work at the boarding house, but now she looked forward to the moments when she could check Owen's wound, bring him his meals, sit with him on the back porch in the evening. They talked more, sharing small pieces of their histories, learning each other's stories. Owen told her about growing up in Texas, about following his brother west in search of better opportunities, about the various ranches where he had worked over the years. Rebecca told him about Sacramento, about her parents, about the hopes she had carried to Belmont that now seemed foolish and naive. Owen's wound healed well, and within 2 weeks he was moving normally again, the bandages no longer necessary. Rebecca knew he would leave soon, that he had come to Belmont only to recover, and would move on once he was strong enough to ride. The thought of his departure filled her with a dread, She did not fully understand. He was just a stranger, just another drifter passing through. His leaving should not matter. But it did matter. Somehow, in the space of a few weeks, Owen had become important to her. His presence made the boarding house feel less like a prison and more like a place where she was simply passing time. His conversations made her feel human again, reminded her that she was more than just a widow, more than just a ghost haunting the rooms where she worked. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she had not since John's death. One evening in mid-August, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Owen said, "I have been thinking about moving on. There is a ranch north of here, up near Austin, that is supposed to be hiring cowboys for the fall roundup. I should probably head up there, see if I can get work." Rebecca felt her stomach drop, but kept her voice steady. "When will you leave?" "In a few days, probably. I am healed enough to ride, and I am running low on money. Cannot stay here forever, much as I might want to." "Of course," Rebecca said. "You have to make a living." Owen was quiet for a moment, then said, "Come with me." Rebecca turned to stare at him. "What?" "Come with me to Austin. There are opportunities there, more than here in Belmont. You could find work, start fresh somewhere new. You do not have to stay in this town that took your husband from you." "I cannot just leave," Rebecca protested. "Mrs. Henderson depends on me. I have obligations." "Mrs. Henderson will find someone else. She always does. But you, Rebecca, you are wasting away here. I can see it. You are surviving but not living, and if you stay much longer, you will forget how to do anything else." "I do not even know you," Rebecca said, but the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "Yes, you do," Owen said simply. "You know me better than most people I have spent years around, and I know you. I know you are stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and capable of building a new life if you just give yourself permission to try." Rebecca shook her head. "I cannot. It is too soon. John has only been gone a few months." "How long is long enough?" Owen asked gently. "A year? 2 years? 10? When will you decide you have grieved sufficiently to deserve happiness again?" "I do not deserve happiness," Rebecca said, the words bursting from her before she could stop them. "John is dead because of me. He was walking me home from the market when that bandit approached us. If I had not been there, if he had been alone, maybe he would have survived. Maybe the bandit would not have bothered him. It is my fault he is gone." "That is not true," Owen said firmly. "John died because some desperate fool decided to take what was not his. You did not pull the trigger. You did not cause his death. You were just there, the same as John was just there. You cannot blame yourself for being in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Then why do I feel so guilty?" Rebecca whispered. "Why do I feel like I should have died instead?" Owen reached over and took her hand, the first time he had touched her beyond the necessary contact of tending his wound. His hand was warm, calloused, strong. "Because you loved him, and love makes us feel responsible for the people we care about. But feeling guilty does not mean you are guilty. It just means you are human." Rebecca looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers intertwined with hers. She should pull away. It was too soon, too fast, too much. But instead, she held on, drawing strength from his touch, allowing herself to feel connected to another person for the first time in months. "I am so broken," she said quietly. "I do not think I will ever be whole again." Owen squeezed her hand gently. "Then I will love your broken pieces too." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Rebecca looked up at him, at his green eyes that saw her so clearly, at his scarred face that had known its own share of pain, at this man who had stumbled into her life at exactly the moment when she needed someone to remind her that broken did not mean worthless. "You barely know me," she said again, but without conviction. "I know enough," Owen replied. "I know you are kind, even when you think you have nothing left to give. I know you are strong, even when you feel weak. I know you make me want to be a better man than I have been. I know that when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth loving." "I do not know if I can love anyone again," Rebecca said honestly. "I do not know if that part of me still works." "That is all right," Owen said. "I have enough love for both of us right now. Maybe someday you will feel the same way, and maybe you will not. But either way, I want you to come with me. I want to give you a chance at something better than this." Rebecca sat in the darkness, holding Owen's hand, feeling the weight of his offer. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to run away from Belmont and its painful memories, to start fresh somewhere new with this man who saw her brokenness and did not flinch. But another part of her was terrified, convinced that she did not deserve a second chance, that any attempt at happiness would only lead to more loss and pain. "Let me think about it," she finally said. "That is all I ask," Owen replied. They sat together until the stars filled the sky and the temperature dropped enough to drive them inside. Owen walked Rebecca to her room, still holding her hand, and when they reached her door, he lifted her fingers to his lips and kissed them gently. "Whatever you decide, I will understand," he said, "but I hope you choose to give yourself another chance at living." Rebecca lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Owen's offer. She tried to imagine leaving Belmont, leaving the grave on the hill where John rested, leaving the last tangible connection to the life they had tried to build together. It felt like betrayal, like abandoning him all over again. But staying felt like suicide, a slow death of the spirit that would leave her as lifeless as the body in the ground. What would John want for her? If he could speak, if he could reach across the divide between the living and the dead, what would he say? Rebecca thought she knew. John had loved her, had wanted her happiness above all else. He would not want her to waste away in grief, would not want her to sacrifice her future on the altar of his memory. He would want her to live, to love again, to find joy in whatever form it took. But knowing what John would want and giving herself permission to do it were two different things. The guilt still gnawed at her, the conviction that she did not deserve happiness, that any attempt to move forward was an insult to his memory. Yet when she thought about Owen, about his green eyes and gentle hands and understanding heart, she felt something stirring in the frozen wasteland of her emotions. It was small, fragile, easily crushed, but it was real. By morning, Rebecca had made her decision. She found Owen in the dining room, eating breakfast with the other boarders. She caught his eye and gave a small nod toward the door. He followed her outside, where the August sun was already heating the day. "I will go with you," she said without preamble, "to Austin. I will give it a try." Owen's face broke into a smile that transformed him, making him look younger, happier, more alive. "You will not regret it," he said. "I promise." "I might," Rebecca said honestly. "I might regret everything, but I will regret staying here more, I think. So yes, I will go with you." They left Belmont 3 days later, after Rebecca had given Mrs. Henderson notice and packed her few belongings. The older woman had been surprisingly understanding, even giving Rebecca her wages through the end of the month, and a small bonus for the quality of her work. "You are making the right choice, Mrs." Henderson said, as she walked Rebecca to the door. "This town is dying, girl. The silver is running out, and when it does, there will be nothing left here but ghosts and regrets. Go north, find something better, and do not look back." Rebecca and Owen rode out of Belmont in the early morning before the heat became oppressive. Rebecca took one last look at the White House where she had lived with John, at the cemetery on the hill where he rested, at the town that had promised so much and delivered so little. Then she turned her horse north and followed Owen into the unknown. The ride to Austin took 3 days, following old mining roads and Indian trails through the Toyabe Range. They traveled slowly, stopping frequently to rest the horses and escape the worst heat of the day. At night, they made camp under the stars, and Owen taught Rebecca how to build a proper fire, how to cook over open flames, how to read the sky for weather signs. They talked endlessly, about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. On the second night, as they sat by the fire, Owen said, "I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you. When we get to Austin, if you want to find your own place, live separately, that is fine. I offered to bring you because I think you deserve better than Belmont, not because I expect you to be with me." Rebecca looked at him across the dancing flames. "What if I want to be with you?" "Then I would be the happiest man in Nevada," Owen said simply. "I do not know what I want yet," Rebecca admitted. "I know I care about you. I know I feel something when I am near you, something I thought I would never feel again. But I do not know if it is love, or just gratitude, or just the desperate need to feel anything other than empty." "That is honest, and I appreciate it," Owen said. "Take your time. Figure out what you feel. I am not going anywhere." They reached Austin on the afternoon of the third day, riding into a town that was larger and more prosperous than Belmont, built on mining wealth that had not yet run dry. The main street was lined with well-built structures, including a proper hotel, several stores, multiple saloons, and even a church. People moved with purpose, not the slow shuffle of those waiting for a dying town to finally give up its ghost. Owen had a friend in Austin, another cowboy named Tom Miller, who worked at the Reese River Ranch outside of town. They found Tom at one of the saloons, and he greeted Owen with genuine warmth, slapping him on the back and offering to buy drinks. When Owen introduced Rebecca, Tom was respectful and welcoming, asking no awkward questions about their relationship or circumstances. "The ranch is definitely hiring," Tom told Owen. "Lost 3 hands last month, 2 to a better offer in California, and 1 who got himself kicked by a horse and decided he preferred a less dangerous line of work. If you are interested, I can introduce you to the foreman tomorrow." "I would appreciate that," Owen said. Tom helped them find rooms at a boarding house run by a cheerful widow named Mrs. Cooper, who charged fair rates and asked few questions. Rebecca and Owen took separate rooms on the same floor, maintaining propriety while staying close. That night, exhausted from travel, Rebecca fell asleep almost immediately, her dreams for once not filled with gunshots and blood. The next morning, Owen rode out to the Reese River Ranch with Tom, leaving Rebecca to explore Austin on her own. She walked the streets, noting the differences between this town and Belmont. Austin felt alive in a way Belmont never had, even before John's death. The people here seemed to believe in their town's future, invested in its success. She saw families, children playing in the streets, women shopping at stores that offered goods beyond the bare necessities. At a general store, Rebecca inquired about work and learned that the owner's wife was looking for help with their dressmaking business. The town had enough wealthy mine owners and their families to support a proper seamstress, and the current operation was overwhelmed with orders. Rebecca explained her experience with sewing and mending, and the owner's wife, a pleasant woman named Sarah Chen, whose family had come from China to work in the mines but had prospered through trade, hired her on the spot. When Owen returned that afternoon with the news that he had been hired at the ranch, Rebecca had her own good news to share. They celebrated by having dinner at the hotel restaurant, a luxury neither had enjoyed in months. Over plates of roasted chicken and potatoes, they talked about their plans, about the opportunities Austin offered, about the future that suddenly seemed possible again. "The foreman says I can have a room in the bunkhouse or take my wages and find my own place in town," Owen said. "I told him I needed to think about it." Rebecca understood what he was really asking. "I think we should take things slowly," she said carefully. "I do care about you, Owen, more than I expected to in such a short time, but I am still figuring out who I am without John, still learning how to be alone before I can learn how to be with someone else." "I understand," Owen said, and she could see in his eyes that he truly did. "So, I will get the room in the bunkhouse, at least for now. I will be working long hours anyway, especially during Roundup. But I will come into town when I can, and we can spend time together, see where this goes." "I would like that," Rebecca said. Over the following weeks, they fell into a comfortable rhythm. Owen worked at the ranch, handling cattle and horses with the easy skill of someone born to the saddle. Rebecca worked at the dress shop, discovering that she had a talent for design as well as execution. Sarah was an excellent teacher, showing her techniques for creating fashionable garments that combined Chinese silkwork with Western styles, producing unique pieces that the wealthy customers loved. Owen came into town twice a week, on Wednesday afternoons and Sunday mornings. They would walk together, exploring the area around Austin, talking about their days, sharing meals. Slowly, carefully, Rebecca felt herself opening up, the ice around her heart melting degree by degree. Owen never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. He simply showed up, consistently and reliably, proving that he meant what he said about loving her broken pieces. One Sunday in late September, they hiked up into the Toyabe Mountains, following a trail that led to a meadow filled with autumn wildflowers. They spread a blanket and ate the picnic lunch Rebecca had packed, enjoying the cool mountain air after months of desert heat. Rebecca lay back on the blanket, looking up at the impossibly blue sky, and realized she felt something she had not experienced in a very long time. She felt peaceful. "Thank you," she said to Owen, who was lying beside her. "For what?" "For being patient with me, for not giving up when I was difficult, for showing me that broken does not mean beyond repair." Owen rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "You were never broken beyond repair. You were just hurt, and hurt takes time to heal." Rebecca reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the stubble there. "I think I am falling in love with you," she said quietly. "I did not think I could. I thought that part of me died with John, but you have proven me wrong." Owen caught her hand and held it against his cheek. "You do not have to be sure. You do not have to make promises. Just let yourself feel whatever you feel." "I feel like kissing you," Rebecca said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Then kiss me," Owen said. She did. It was gentle at first, tentative, two people learning each other's rhythms. But then something caught fire between them, and the kiss deepened, became something urgent and necessary. Owen pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her hair, and Rebecca pressed herself against him, feeling alive and present and real for the first time since John's death. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen said, "I love you, Rebecca Lawson. I have loved you since that first day when you helped me, even though you were drowning in your own pain. I will love you for the rest of my life, if you will let me." "Yes," Rebecca said. "Yes, I will let you." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, holding each other, talking about the future they might build together. Owen told her about his dream of owning his own ranch someday, a small spread where he could raise horses and cattle without answering to anyone else. Rebecca told him about her dream of opening her own dress shop, becoming a true businesswoman, independent and successful. They made plans, painted pictures with words of a life they could create together. When they returned to Austin that evening, everything had changed between them. The careful distance they had maintained collapsed, replaced by the certainty that they were meant to be together. Owen quit the bunkhouse and found a small house on the edge of town that they could rent together. It was not proper, a man and woman living together unmarried, but neither of them cared. They had both learned that life was too short and too uncertain to waste on propriety. Sarah did not judge when Rebecca explained the situation. "Love is rare and precious," she said simply. "Grab it with both hands when you find it." They moved into the house in early October, carrying Rebecca's few belongings and Owen's even fewer possessions across the threshold of their new home. It was small, just 3 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. They bought furniture from other families leaving the area, piece by piece furnishing their space. Rebecca planted wildflowers in the yard, the same way she had in Belmont, but this time they seemed to take root better, as if the soil here was more welcoming to growing things. Living together brought its own challenges and joys. They learned each other's habits, the good and the bad. Owen was messy, leaving his clothes scattered wherever he took them off, forgetting to put things back where they belonged. Rebecca was particular, needing everything in its place, becoming anxious when disorder crept in. They argued sometimes about small things that were really about larger fears and insecurities. But they also laughed, cooked meals together, lay in bed talking until late at night, made love with increasing confidence and passion. One evening in November, as the first snow began to fall on the mountains around Austin, Rebecca said, "I want to marry you." Owen looked up from the saddle he was oiling at the kitchen table. "What?" "I want to marry you," Rebecca repeated. "Properly, legally, in front of everyone. I want to be your wife." "Are you sure?" Owen asked carefully. "I know you were married before. Know that might bring up difficult memories." "I will always love John," Rebecca said honestly. "He was my first love, and he will always have a place in my heart. But he is gone, and I am still here, and I love you. I want to build a life with you, a real life. I want to have your children, grow old with you, die knowing that I did not waste the years I was given. Does that sound acceptable to you?" Owen set down the saddle and crossed to where she stood. He took her hands in his green eyes bright with emotion. "Rebecca Lawson, nothing would make me happier than to be your husband. Yes, I will marry you. 1,000 times, yes." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Austin, with Sarah and Tom standing as witnesses. Rebecca wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery, the finest work she had ever produced. Owen wore his best suit, purchased new for the occasion, and looked so handsome that Rebecca felt her breath catch when she saw him standing at the altar. The preacher, a kind man named Reverend Walsh, spoke about the sacred nature of marriage, about two people becoming one, about building a life based on love and trust and faith. Rebecca listened to the words and thought about John, about the marriage they had shared that had been cut so brutally short. She felt a moment of sadness, a pang of grief for what had been lost. But then Owen squeezed her hand, and she looked into his eyes, and she knew she was exactly where she needed to be. "I do," she said when the moment came, her voice clear and strong. "I do," Owen echoed, sliding a simple gold band onto her finger. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Walsh said with a smile. "You may kiss your bride." Owen kissed her then, in front of their few friends and the eyes of God, and Rebecca kissed him back, sealing their vows with joy and hope and the promise of tomorrow. They celebrated with a small dinner at the hotel, just the four of them, drinking wine and eating well and telling stories. Sarah gave them a beautiful quilt she had made, decorated with patterns that represented good fortune and happiness. Tom gave Owen a new saddle, hand-tooled with their initials worked into the leather. Rebecca felt overwhelmed by the kindness, by the sense that she had found not just a husband, but a family, a community, a place where she belonged. That night, in their small house on the edge of town, Owen carried Rebecca across the threshold, even though they had been living there for weeks. They made love as husband and wife, the experience somehow different, more meaningful, weighted with the promises they had made. Afterwards, lying in Owen's arms, Rebecca thought about how far she had come from that terrible day in Belmont, when John had died and her world had ended. "I never thought I would be happy again," she told Owen quietly. "When I was in Belmont, when everything felt so dark and hopeless, I could not imagine a future where I felt anything but emptiness. But you changed that. You showed me that broken pieces can be put back together, just in a different pattern than before." "We put each other back together," Owen said, kissing her forehead. "I was just as broken as you when I came to Belmont, just better at hiding it. But you reminded me what it felt like to care about someone, to want to be better, to believe in tomorrow. We saved each other." Winter settled over Austin, bringing cold temperatures and occasional snow. The ranch work slowed, and Owen had more time at home. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading or talking or simply being together. Rebecca continued her work at the dress shop, which was busier than ever as wealthy wives wanted new garments for the holiday season. She saved every penny she could, adding to the small fund she and Owen were building toward their future dreams. In January, Rebecca realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mixture of emotions. Joy, because she wanted Owen's child, wanted to create new life with him. Fear, because she remembered too well the dangers of childbirth, the women she had known who had died bringing babies into the world. And guilt, because some part of her still felt like having a child with Owen was a betrayal of John, a final severing of the ties to her first marriage. She told Owen one evening after dinner, simply and directly, "I am going to have a baby." Owen stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen, while she laughed and protested. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "A child. Our child." "Are you happy?" Rebecca asked when he set her down. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Owen said. "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful and amazed. We are going to be parents, Rebecca. We are going to create a family." They told Sarah and Tom the next day, and both were delighted. Sarah began making baby clothes immediately, tiny garments decorated with careful stitching. Tom joked that Owen would have to learn to be responsible now. No more staying out late at the saloons or riding wild horses. Owen took the teasing in stride, his joy too great to be diminished by anything. As winter gave way to spring, Rebecca's belly grew, and the reality of the coming child became more tangible. She felt the baby move for the first time in April, a flutter that grew into kicks and rolls. Owen would put his hand on her stomach and feel their child, his face filled with wonder. They argued gently about names, making lists and crossing them out, trying to find something that felt right. The pregnancy was not easy. Rebecca was often sick in the mornings, exhausted in the afternoons, uncomfortable in the evenings. Her body ached in new ways, and she worried constantly about the health of the baby, about the dangers of labor, about whether she would be a good mother. Owen was patient and supportive, taking over more of the household duties, making sure she rested, listening to her fears without dismissing them. In early July, as the summer heat began to build, Owen announced that he had saved enough money to buy the land he wanted. It was a small parcel about 10 miles outside of Austin, with good grazing and access to water. He showed Rebecca the deed with shaking hands, barely able to believe that he now owned something real, something permanent. "This is our future," he said. "We can build a house here, start a ranch, raise our family. It will not be easy, but it will be ours." Rebecca held the deed and felt tears prick her eyes. "John and I used to talk about owning land," she said quietly. "We dreamed about having our own place, being independent. I thought that dream died with him." "Do you feel guilty?" Owen asked gently. "About having this with me instead of him?" Rebecca thought about it honestly. "A little," she admitted. "But mostly I just feel grateful. Grateful that I got a second chance, grateful that I met you, grateful that we are building something beautiful together. I think John would be happy for me. I think he would want this for me." "I think so too," Owen said. They began planning the house they would build, sketching designs on scraps of paper, arguing about the number of rooms and the placement of windows. It would take time to construct, would probably not be ready before the baby came, but knowing they had a future, a place that was truly their own, gave them something to work toward. Rebecca went into labor on a sweltering August evening, just as the sun was setting. The pain started as a dull ache in her back and quickly intensified, coming faster and harder than she had expected. Owen fetched the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had delivered most of the babies in Austin over the past 20 years. Sarah came too, holding Rebecca's hand through the contractions, wiping her face with cool cloths. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Rebecca screamed and cried, convinced at times that she would die, that the baby would die, that this pain would never end. Owen stayed nearby, pacing the floor outside the bedroom, listening to his wife's agony and feeling helpless. Every scream felt like a knife in his heart. But finally, as the sun climbed high on a bright August morning, the baby came. A boy, healthy and loud, with a thick head of dark hair and strong lungs that announced his arrival to the world. Mrs. Patterson cleaned him and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Rebecca's arms. Rebecca looked down at her son, at this tiny, perfect person she and Owen had created together, and felt something shift deep inside her. The last frozen pieces of her heart, the parts that had refused to heal, finally melted completely. She was whole again, not in the way she had been before John's death, but in a new way. She had been broken and put back together, and the scars would always be there. But scars were proof of healing, evidence of survival, marks of strength. Owen came into the room, his face pale and anxious. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" "We are perfect," Rebecca said, her voice hoarse from screaming. "Come meet your son." Owen approached the bed slowly, as if afraid he might break the spell. He looked down at the baby in Rebecca's arms, and tears streamed down his face. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "He is perfect." "What should we name him?" Rebecca asked. They had discussed many possibilities, but had never quite agreed. Now, looking at their son, Owen said, "What about James, after my grandfather, the man who taught me everything I know about horses and honor?" "James Garrett," Rebecca said, testing the name. "I like it. James Garrett, welcome to the world." The first few weeks with James were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. He was a demanding baby, wanting to nurse constantly, crying when he was put down, sleeping only in short stretches. Rebecca was overwhelmed and delighted, her body recovering slowly from the birth, while her heart expanded with a love she had not known existed. Owen helped as much as he could, walking the floor with James when Rebecca needed to rest, changing diapers with fumbling but earnest effort, staring at his son with an expression of perpetual amazement. Sarah and Tom were frequent visitors, bringing food and supplies, offering advice and support. Sarah especially was invaluable, having raised 4 children of her own and knowing all the tricks for soothing a fussy baby. She showed Rebecca how to swaddle James tightly, how to recognize the difference between hunger cries and tired cries, how to care for herself while caring for her infant. As fall arrived and the weather cooled, Owen began building their house on the land he had purchased. He worked on weekends and whenever he could spare time from the ranch, slowly erecting walls and roof. Tom helped when he could, and gradually the structure took shape. It was simple but sturdy, with 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a parlor, and a wide porch facing the mountains. Owen built it to last, using techniques he had learned from a carpenter he had worked with years ago in Texas. By the time James was 6 months old, the house was finished enough to move into. They transported their belongings in a borrowed wagon, setting up their furniture in the new space, hanging curtains in the windows, making the place their own. Rebecca planted wildflowers in the yard once again, and this time they took root enthusiastically, as if they knew this was a place where growing things belonged. Life on the ranch was harder than life in town had been. Water had to be hauled from the creek, firewood had to be cut and stacked, fences needed constant repair. Owen worked from dawn to dusk, building up their herd of cattle, breaking horses to sell, doing all the 1,000 tasks that ranching required. Rebecca cared for James, kept the house, started a vegetable garden, learned to milk the cow they had purchased. Some days, she collapsed into bed exhausted, wondering if they had made a mistake, if they had taken on too much. But other days, she would stand on the porch with James in her arms, watching Owen work in the distance, looking out at the land that belonged to them, and she would feel a deep satisfaction. They were building something real, something lasting, something that would outlive them. It was hard work, but it was their work, and that made all the difference. James grew quickly, reaching all his milestones early. He was crawling by 6 months, walking by 10 months, talking in simple sentences by 18 months. He was a happy child, curious about everything, fearless in a way that gave Rebecca heart attacks regularly. He loved the animals, especially the horses, and would toddle after them making horse sounds, much to Owen's delight. When James was 2 years old, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less of a shock, more of a natural progression. They were ready for another child, had always planned on a large family. The pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Rebecca knew what to expect, or perhaps because her body was more prepared. She continued working as long as she could, caring for James and the household while her belly expanded. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma, arrived on a mild spring day in 1881, with considerably less drama than James had. The labor was shorter, the delivery smoother, and Rebecca recovered quickly. Emma was calmer than her brother had been, content to observe the world with serious dark eyes, rarely fussing. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, bringing her toys and singing to her in his off-key toddler voice. The years that followed were full and busy. Owen expanded the ranch, buying more cattle, acquiring better horses, building a reputation for honest dealing and quality stock. Rebecca started taking in sewing again when the children were old enough, creating garments for the families around Austin, earning money that went into their savings. They hired a ranch hand to help Owen with the heavy work, a young man named Peter, who had come west seeking opportunity and found it working for the Garretts. They had 2 more children, another boy named Thomas, born in 1883, and a daughter named Lucy, born in 1885. The house that had seemed so spacious when they built it became crowded with the noise and chaos of 4 children. Owen added on 2 more bedrooms, expanding their home to accommodate their growing family. The yard was always full of children playing, animals wandering, laundry drying in the Nevada sun. Rebecca sometimes thought about Belmont, about the woman she had been when Owen first found her, broken and empty and convinced she would never be whole again. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. The Rebecca she had become was strong, capable, surrounded by love and purpose. She still thought about John sometimes, especially on the anniversary of his death, and she always felt a pang of sadness for the life they had never gotten to live together. But the sadness was softer now, tinged with gratitude for what they had shared, rather than anger at what had been stolen. One evening in the summer of 1888, after the children had been put to bed and the ranch was quiet, Rebecca and Owen sat on the porch as they had so many times before. She was mending a shirt, and he was working on a piece of leather tack, both of them comfortable in the silence between them. "Do you remember that night in Belmont when you asked me to come with you?" Rebecca said suddenly. Owen looked up from his work. "Of course. I remember being terrified you would say no." "I almost did," Rebecca admitted. "I was so scared, so convinced that I did not deserve happiness, that trying to move forward was somehow betraying John. If I had given in to that fear, if I had stayed in Belmont, I would have wasted the rest of my life." "But you did not stay," Owen pointed out. You were brave enough to try. Only because you showed me it was possible, Rebecca said. You looked at my broken pieces and did not turn away. You loved me when I could not love myself. You gave me a reason to keep going when I had none. Owen set down his work and moved to sit beside her on the porch swing. He took her hand, the same way he had that first night, and intertwined his fingers with hers. You gave me just as much. I was drifting before I met you, just going from one place to the next, never putting down roots, never believing I could have something permanent. You made me want to build a life instead of just surviving one day to the next. They sat together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. A horse whinnied in the corral. A coyote called from the hills. Inside the house, one of the children cried out in sleep and then fell silent again. I love you, Rebecca said. I do not say it enough, but I do. I love you more than I thought possible, more than I knew I was capable of loving. You are my whole heart. And you are mine, Owen said. Today, tomorrow, and forever. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their children growing up. James became a skilled rider like his father, spending long hours working with the horses, learning the business from the ground up. Emma was quieter, preferring books and drawing to the outdoor work. But she had a gift for numbers that made her invaluable in managing the ranch's accounts. Thomas and Lucy were still young, but showing their own emerging personalities and talents. The ranch prospered. Owen's reputation grew, and buyers came from as far as California to purchase his cattle and horses. They were never wealthy, but they were comfortable, able to provide for their family and put money aside for the future. Rebecca's sewing business expanded as well, and she began training Emma in the craft, passing on skills the way they had been passed to her. In 1892, when James was 14 and ready for more responsibility, Owen officially made him a partner in the ranch. They added "and son" to the sign at the gate, and James took his new status seriously, working even harder to prove himself worthy of his father's trust. Rebecca watched her son become a man and felt pride mixed with nostalgia for the chubby toddler who used to follow Owen around making horse sounds. As the century drew to a close, the Garretts had become a respected family in the Austin area. They were known for their honesty, their hard work, their strong family bonds. Neighbors came to them for advice, for help during hard times, for the simple comfort of friendship. The house Rebecca and Owen had built was always full of people, of laughter, of life. One day in the spring of 1899, as Rebecca was working in her garden, she heard the sound of horses approaching. She looked up to see a stranger riding toward the house, a well-dressed man on a fine horse. She called for Owen, who came from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. The stranger introduced himself as a lawyer from Reno. He had news about John Lawson's estate. Apparently, John had had a distant uncle back east who had died recently, leaving a substantial inheritance. Since John had no other living relatives, and since the will had stipulated that the inheritance should go to John's widow if he had one, Rebecca was entitled to the money. Rebecca stood in shock as the lawyer explained the details. The inheritance was substantial, enough to change their lives significantly. But what struck her most was not the money, but the timing. More than 20 years after John's death, he was reaching out across time to provide for her, to ensure her security, as if even in death he wanted to take care of her. That evening, after the lawyer had left and the children had been told the news, Rebecca sat on the porch with Owen and cried for the first time in years. She cried for John, for the life they had never gotten to live, for the man he had been and the loss she had carried for so long. Owen held her while she wept, not saying anything, just being present the way he always was when she needed him. I want to use some of the money to put a proper headstone on John's grave, Rebecca said when she could speak again. He deserves to be remembered properly. That is a good idea, Owen said. They made the journey to Belmont a month later, just the two of them, leaving the children with Sarah and Tom. Belmont had continued to decline over the years, and now it was nearly a ghost town, with only a few dozen residents remaining. The silver had run out, and most people had moved on to more promising places. The boarding house where Rebecca had worked was boarded up. The saloons were empty. Even the cemetery looked neglected, many of the wooden crosses having rotted and fallen over. They found John's grave with some difficulty, the simple marker Rebecca had placed there years ago, nearly illegible from weathering. They cleaned the area, pulling weeds and straightening the plot. Then they waited while a stonemason they had brought from Austin installed a proper granite headstone, carved with John's name, dates, and a simple inscription: "Beloved husband, gone too soon." Rebecca stood before the grave, looking at the new stone, and spoke words she had never been able to say before. "Thank you, John. Thank you for loving me, for bringing me west, for giving me a reason to be strong when you were gone. You will always be my first love, and I will never forget what we had together. But I have built a new life now, a good life, and I hope wherever you are happy for me. I hope you know that I did not waste the years you could not have. I made them count." Owen stood beside her, his hand in hers, and Rebecca felt the circle close. She had been broken, and she had healed. She had lost everything, and she had rebuilt. She had been empty, and she had been filled. The journey had been long and painful, but it had brought her here, to this moment, to this life, to this love. They left Belmont for the last time as the sun set, riding back toward Austin, toward home, toward the family waiting for them. Rebecca did not look back. There was no need. The past was finally at peace, and the future stretched ahead, full of promise. The inheritance from John's uncle allowed the Garretts to expand their ranch significantly. They bought adjacent property, built a second barn, invested in better breeding stock. Owen hired more hands, including 2 young cowboys who reminded him of himself at that age, eager and hard-working and looking for a chance to prove themselves. The ranch became one of the most successful in central Nevada, known for producing quality cattle and horses. Rebecca used part of her portion of the inheritance to finally open her own dress shop in Austin, fulfilling the dream she had carried for years. Emma worked with her, and together they created beautiful garments that combined practicality with style, serving the needs of ranch wives while incorporating the elegance that wealthier customers demanded. The shop became a gathering place for women in the area, a space where they could talk and share news while being fitted for new clothes. James married in 1901, wedding a local rancher's daughter named Catherine, and they moved into a house Owen built for them on the ranch property. Thomas and Lucy were still in school, both bright students who talked about perhaps going to college in California someday. Emma showed no interest in marriage, preferring to focus on the business she was building with her mother, and Rebecca supported her daughter's independence wholeheartedly. As the new century progressed and the frontier era gave way to something more settled and civilized, Rebecca sometimes reflected on how far she had come from that terrible day in 1878 when John had been killed and her world had ended. She had survived what she thought would destroy her. She had found love when she believed she could never love again. She had built a family, a business, a life that mattered. One evening in 1905, as Rebecca and Owen celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered around them. James and Catherine had given them 2 grandchildren already, with a third on the way. Emma's dress shop had expanded to include a second location in Tonopah. Thomas was working as a teacher in Austin while studying law through correspondence courses. Lucy had just become engaged to a young engineer working on the new railroad expansion. Looking around at the people filling their home, at the legacy they had created together, Rebecca felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about that night in Belmont when Owen had said he would love her broken pieces, when she had been so damaged she could not imagine ever being whole again. He had kept his promise, loving her through the healing, supporting her while she learned to live again, building a life with her that was richer and more meaningful than anything she had imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked quietly, sliding his arm around her waist. "About how lucky I am," Rebecca said. "About how a single moment of chance brought you to Belmont when I needed you most. About how easily things could have gone differently. How I could have said no when you asked me to leave with you. How I could have stayed trapped in grief forever. About how grateful I am that I was brave enough to try again." "I am the lucky one," Owen said. "You gave me a reason to stop drifting, to put down roots, to believe in tomorrow. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. You made me better than I was." "We made each other better," Rebecca said, leaning into his embrace. Their children called them to cut the anniversary cake Emma had baked, and they moved to join the celebration. But for just a moment longer, Rebecca and Owen stood together, looking at each other the way they had that first night on the back porch of the boarding house in Belmont, seeing past the surface to the deep places where souls recognize each other. The years that followed were good ones, marked by the normal joys and sorrows of life. There were more grandchildren, 6 in total by 1910, filling the ranch with noise and laughter. There were also losses. Tom Miller died in 1907, leaving Owen to mourn the friend who had helped him build his life in Austin. Sarah Chen passed in 1909, and Rebecca grieved for the woman who had been like a mother to her, who had taught her so much about business and strength and resilience. But through it all, Owen and Rebecca remained anchored to each other, their love deepening with each passing year. They worked together, played together, faced challenges together, celebrated victories together. They had built something that lasted, something that would outlive them, something that made the world a slightly better place. In 1915, as they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary, their family gathered once again. James was now running most of the ranch operations, allowing Owen to slow down and enjoy his later years. Emma's dress shops had made her a successful businesswoman in her own right. Thomas had become a respected lawyer in Carson City. Lucy and her husband had 3 children and were building a life in California. The house Owen had built more than 30 years earlier still stood strong, filled with photographs and memories, and the evidence of a life well lived. Rebecca, now in her late 50s, looked around at the people she and Owen had created and nurtured, at the legacy they were leaving behind, and she felt at peace. She had survived tragedy, rebuilt from ruin, found love in unexpected places, and created meaning from suffering. Her story had not ended in Belmont on that terrible day in 1878. It had only paused, waiting for the next chapter to begin. "I never thought I would be this happy," she told Owen as they sat together on the porch in the twilight, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. "When I told you I would never be whole again, I believed it. I truly thought I was broken beyond repair." "You were never broken," Owen said. "You were just hurt. And hurts heal if you give them time and care and love." "You gave me all 3, Rebecca said. "You gave me everything." "And you gave me a life worth living," Owen replied. "You gave me a reason to be better, to do more, to build something lasting. We saved each other, Rebecca. That is what love does." They sat together as the stars emerged, holding hands the way they had on that first night in Belmont when Owen had offered her a chance at a new beginning. They had taken that chance, embraced the possibility, and created something beautiful from the ashes of loss. The sun set over the Nevada mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, and Rebecca felt the last shadows of grief finally lift. She was whole again, not in the same way she had been before, but in a deeper, richer way. She carried her scars with pride, knowing they were evidence of survival, proof of strength, marks of a journey well traveled. And as the darkness settled and the house behind them glowed with light and warmth and the laughter of family, Rebecca leaned against Owen and whispered, "I love you, today, tomorrow, and forever." "Forever?" Owen echoed, kissing her forehead. "That is exactly how long I plan to love you." They sat together in the peaceful night, two people who had found each other in the darkest moments and had built a life illuminated by love, proving that broken pieces could indeed become whole again, that endings could lead to new beginnings, and that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones written in the aftermath of loss, when two wounded souls choose to heal together and create something beautiful from the fragments of shattered dreams.